Understanding Gentiles in Romans. A Call to the Lost Sheep of Israel. Photo by Michael Fausert on Unsplash. The concept of Gentiles in the New Testament has often been understood in a Christian context to refer to non-Israelite nations or people outside of the faith. However, this interpretation contradicts the rich biblical understanding rooted in the Old Testament, where the term Gentiles can also refer to scattered Israelites, those who have lost their identity and heritage through dispersion and idolatry. In the Apostle Paul's letter to the Romans, particularly in Romans 11, we find the term Gentiles being used in a way that aligns with the regathering of the lost tribes of Israel. In Romans 11:17-24, Paul speaks of the wild olive branches being grafted into the good olive tree, which is a metaphor for the house of Israel. This imagery points to the scattered Israelites who, after being dispersed among the nations, are now being brought back into the fold of God's covenant through the gospel. The wild olive branches and the lost tribes of Israel. The wild olive branches in Romans 11 are often thought of as non-Israelite nations, but this is a misunderstanding of the biblical context. In the Old Testament, Israel is consistently referred to as the olive tree, Jeremiah 11:16, Hosea 14:6. The wild branches, therefore, refer to the scattered Israelites who have been lost and are now being regathered. Paul's reference to grafting in the wild branches speaks to the spiritual restoration of the lost sheep of Israel, not to the salvation of unrelated non-Israelite nations. This aligns with the broader biblical narrative of God's covenantal promise to Israel, and specifically to the lost tribes, as prophesied in places like Ezekiel 37 and Hosea 1. Romans 11, the restoration of Israel. Romans 11 explicitly underscores that God has not forsaken his people Israel. In fact, Christian Bible translations often title the chapter God's Mercy on Israel, highlighting the continued relevance and salvation of Israel. Even as Paul acknowledges the role of the Gentiles, or scattered Israelites, in this broader redemptive plan. Verses such as Romans 11:25-26. For I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part is happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. And so all Israel shall be saved, are frequently cited in Christian doctrine to suggest that Gentiles are being grafted into the promise of salvation. However, the Gentiles here are the lost Israelites, who are part of the fullness of the promise being fulfilled in Christ. This interpretation aligns with the Bible's consistent use of Gentiles as referring to scattered Israelites, not foreign nations. The covenant with Israel. The key to understanding this passage in Romans is recognizing that the covenant was made specifically with Israel. From God's call of Abraham to his establishment of the covenant with Israel at Sinai, the biblical narrative shows that God's promises were always intended for his chosen people. Jesus' mission, as outlined in Matthew 15:24, was to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, reaffirming that the focus of salvation is the regathering of these lost tribes. The Apostle Paul, in his writings, is continuing this mission by reaching out to the lost tribes scattered among the Gentiles. The Gentiles who are coming to faith are not entirely new people, but the scattered Israelites returning to the fold of God's covenant through Christ. Conclusion. The term Gentiles in the New Testament, particularly in Romans 11, should be understood in the context of the regathering of the lost tribes of Israel. These Gentiles are not unrelated nations, but Israelites who have been scattered, many of whom have lost their identity through centuries of dispersion. The good news of salvation through Christ is a call to these lost Israelites, beckoning them back to their covenantal relationship with the God of Israel. The gospel, therefore, is the means by which the wild branches are grafted back into the olive tree, fulfilling God's promise to his people. Written by Christopher Turner, expert theologist specializing in Israelite heritage and covenant theology, biblical scholar and cultural historian, focusing on ancient scriptures and the lost tribes of Israel. Author of Rediscovering Israel, a comprehensive study of covenantal promises and the scattered tribes. Contributor to theological journals' insights on Hebrew texts, prophecy, and New Testament context. Public speaker discussing Israelite identity, prophecy, and scriptural truth in the modern age. Covenant theology researcher unveiling the promises made to Israel and their fulfillment.